Thanks so much. We've been up at the Trout Ranch the last few days, and as many of you saw, we had a painting displayed up there. And we've had this world-renowned artist amongst us, Mike Stidham, and he has graciously donated this painting for auction for our charity. We here at the Bronze Buffalo Club, we support a family of organizations, nonprofit organizations, including the GIC and others. And we would like to take a minute to auction off this painting. And 100% of the proceeds will go to one of these charities. But for a minute, I'd just like to invite Mike up here and just tell us a little bit about this painting, and then we'll start with the auction.
The Star Valley Trout Resort. I don't know if that's a resort for trout or people who catch trout, but it's got some really nice trout in it. We were there last week, and I did a painting of one of them. And it's an oil painting done on canvas. It's not quite dry yet, but it will be signed and it will be framed when it's done.
Great.
That's about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mike. It's the first thing I admired up at the Trout Ranch when I got there. So we would like to start the bidding off today at $1,000. And we've got 1,000. Thank you, Wally. I know you're thinking hard. It's Marie and we're fighting about it, which one of us is going to bid, so. Okay, $2,000. 25? 25? 2,500? 2,500. 3, Mark, thanks. 3,000. 35? I see 4. Okay, 4,000, Alan? 45. Wally, 4,500, thank you. 5,000. 4,800.
Going once.
Okay, Wally, 5,000. Any other takers? Paul? Okay, 5,000, going once, going twice. You sure, Alan? Okay, Wally, 5,000, thank you so much, Wally. That'll go 100% to nonprofit charity, thank you.
All right, that's wonderful, thank you. So to continue with our afternoon keynote, this is titled Dollar Bill Civics. And we are pleased to welcome back a friend of GIC, Paul McCulley. So Paul is the Senior Fellow in Financial Macroeconomics for Cornell Law School in the program on law and regulation of financial institutions. Prior, he was the Chief Economist and Managing Director at PIMCO. He also served as a portfolio manager there. He's coined the terms shadow banking and Minsky moment. So please welcome back Paul McCulley.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is good to see the same faces again. It's good to be seen, right? Even if it's hot. I was reflecting on what I've spoken about, or I guess some would say lectured about in recent years here. This is my 8th year. I wasn't here for 10 years, but I'm at 8 years. And I particularly remember the last several years because we've had an economy, a financial system, a global environment, global ecosystem that's been in transition. So I literally have been doing a lot more lecturing than I have forecasting, which is actually a lot more fun for me in retirement, because if you do a lecture well, then you leave someone with an idea that has shelf life, whereas the shelf life of a forecast doesn't tend to be terribly long. In fact, one of the things I took away from this morning is that the shelf life of a forecast is getting shorter and shorter from a standpoint of market impact, because you can disseminate it so incredibly quickly. I reflect back, and in 2015, I talked a lot about liquidity traps. We entered a liquidity trap after the financial crisis, and by 2015, it looked like the economy was getting a grip on itself in a very meaningful way. So we had escaped, if you will, a liquidity trap with monetary policy alone. All of our textbooks back when we were young people said that if you're in a liquidity trap and trapped against zero for short-term interest rates, that monetary policy is no longer the right tool to stimulate the economy, because unless you want to go negative and give that a go, you have run out of ammo, and the right ammo is fiscal policy, otherwise known as Roosevelt type of policies associated with larger debt. However, we got out of a liquidity trap using the monetary policy tool alone. And I call that lecture Escape Fandango. How the hell did we do it? And the answer was really simple, which was something that I dubbed endogenous delevering, which you could also call asset inflation. That you can get out of a liquidity trap using monetary policy alone. It is possible, and we did it, because you can reflate all asset prices that have debt on them, and therefore internally delever the system. And I introduced the Gordon formula to explain how asset prices are determined and how you do that. But the key takeaway or concept from that lecture is you can get out of a liquidity trap using monetary policy alone. It is possible, and we have done it, and we are escaping. That was one key takeaway. The second was that the income distribution consequences, the wealth distribution consequences of getting out of a liquidity trap using monetary policy alone stink. Absolutely, unambiguously stink. Because if you use monetary policy alone and asset reflation alone, then axiomatically, as a tautology, you will be shifting wealth to the upper class and income to the upper class. So you will come out of a liquidity trap. You will come out of a liquidity trap. That's good news. But you will come out with an income and wealth distribution that is highly problematic for political stability. That was 2015. 2016, I continued on that theme, and there that was almost a pure lecture in the fundamental difference between democracy and capitalism. And we had some great fun with that. And I was building on the whole concept that because we got out of the liquidity trap using monetary policy alone, we had a political problem on our hands. We had a lot of angry people who didn't get to participate in the escape fandango. They were lost in the wilderness, and that had political implications. That was 16. A few months after we were here in 16, we heard a very loud echo of the notion that occasionally angry people do things that people don't necessarily consider to be rational, which they did. It was actually the people who had not benefited from the economic recovery that put Mr. Trump in the White House. Now here I'm not making a political statement at all. That is simply a fact. In fact, I can quote Mr. Trump himself early in the campaign when he says, "I love uneducated people." out of his mouth. They voted for him in spades, not because they were uneducated. That was just simply a side characteristic. It's because they were angry. They were angry, which led to what we talked about last year, which is the whole issue that fiscal and monetary policy need to be looked at as a joint venture. While monetary policy inherently has the ability to get you out of a liquidity trap, it does. That there are consequences. And they aren't necessarily consequences that are bad for Wall Street. In fact, the consequences are very good for Wall Street. The consequence of using monetary policy alone is that it corrodes, and I use that word on purpose, corrodes the very fabric of democracy, leading to a belief that the system is rigged against me. Remember, Bernie Sanders ran on the same platform and was appealing to the same cohort who didn't participate in the recovery because the tool that was used to generate the recovery didn't apply to them. So last year, my overall theme was that we were going to henceforward, for political reasons, going to have to start thinking in terms of monetary policy not being the only game in town. That the half-life of monetary policy as the only game in town was coming to an end. And for a good chunk of my career, yours too, Michael, monetary policy was the one thing you had to get right. Everything else was, we don't need to attend that lecture. Let's just get the Fed right. That we were going to be going forward at a mosaic of macroeconomic policies. And so as a teacher, I was basically saying, pay attention to something besides the monetary policy class. And I was focused quite a lot on the fiscal policy class because Mr. Trump was ramming through a budget-busting fiscal package, which is a good Keynesian I had zero problem with. Zero problem with. In fact, I'd written an op-ed that I think we talked about it in last year or the year before, taking Hillary Clinton to severe task in the last debate with Mr. Trump, when she said, my fiscal program will not add a penny to the national debt. Excuse me, ma'am? You flunked Keynesianism. I think the Republican side said the same thing, had full intention of making it Keynesian. Keynesian tilted upstream, but nonetheless, the election validated the notion that you can purposely run fiscal deficits and not be embarrassed about it. And I described and still believe to this day that the predominant outcome of the election of 16 was to free us from the shackles of nonsensical fiscal austerity. That's a theme that I'm going to continue today. Fiscal austerity for the United States as the custodian of the global reserve currency has for my entire life been a nonsensical idea. A nonsensical idea. The notion that we are somehow burdening our children with unsufferable debt and therefore we need to suck it up today has always been a crazy idea and it's been varied out in the economic performance of the last decade. And I think also is the proximate reason that we've had such such polarization in our politics. So this is all in the sense of review. I do this now that I teach in my class at Cornell, so therefore I like to sort of bring the students up, as it were, to what we've covered so far. And then I will give another segment. Teaching actually is very different than working on Wall Street because you have 13 weeks. So you don't draw a conclusion in week 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. You give just a bite. And then hopefully at the end of the course, you have painted a mosaic. So what we've discussed in recent years when I've been here on the stage is you can get out of a liquidity trap with monetary policy. It's doable. The income distribution consequences stink. 3, there will be a political result, and the political result will change how the world works. That it's a dynamic. It's a dynamic. I did not forecast, I'll be the first to say, I did not forecast last year that we would be in a trade war a year later. I'm not surprised, but I didn't forecast it. What I forecast is you got to look at all the tools now, because we have changed the leadership to the point that the leadership rejects the notion that monetary policy is the only game in town. There are other games. Trade is an important game. Immigration law is an important game. Reversing the Affordable Care Act is an important game. There are many, many games in play now. What I want to do today is add one more nugget to the syllabus, and hopefully we'll next year be able to draw hopefully something from this nugget, which is to ask a question. What is the fundamental societal, political, and legal foundation of the Fed being independent? Are central banks more generally around the world being independent? I used the phrase earlier that for much of our careers, monetary policy was the only game in town. And a corollary of that was, and monetary policy authorities must always be independent of the political. We never want to have central bank policy polluted by that nasty political stuff. So it's been a religious canon, if you will. Monetary policy should be independent and should be the only game in town. Mr. Greenspan absolutely loved that doctrine. Absolutely loved that doctrine. It's weakening around the world because the political consequences. Democracy, one person, one vote, demands some degree of equity and fairness in outcomes. And that's what we're dealing with right now. Now, let's get into the meat of what I want to talk about, and then we'll try to draw to a conclusion pretty quick. We have one handout, and I'm not going to hand it out to you because you all have it somewhere on your person. Can everybody get out a piece of currency? If you don't have one, you can go in debt and borrow one. Huh? Yeah, this right here. This is our one and only handout. I think up at the ranch, David Kotok had one handout. Now, I'm going to walk through a series of Socratic questions here. I teach at a law school, so therefore I'm allowed to be Socratic. Not paper chase, but, you know, Socratic. What's it say at the very top? It says Federal Reserve Note. Okay, we got that. What does it say right below that?
This note is...
No. You're jumping too far ahead. The United States of America. Okay. So, something that says the United States of America on it seems to have some significance. This is the currency of the United States of America. But then let's go back to the first response. What does it say at the very top? Federal Reserve Note. Now, Federal Reserve Note. Now, using logic, I would say, well, it's the United States of America, so the Federal Reserve must be an agency of the United States of America. That would be the right answer, correct? So we have an agency of the United States of America issuing a note. What is a note?
An obligation.
A complication?
Obligation.
An obligation. An obligation. So does that mean that this thing is an asset or a liability?
Yes.
The answer is you're on today, Bill.
You're doing my lecture. I do mine at the University of Chicago.
You're doing mine in a nicer setting at this time of year, I bet you.
True enough.
True enough. Note. Note implies obligation. So this is a liability of the United States. Is that fair? It's a liability. But it's also an asset, right? You took it out of your pocket. When this is in your pocket, is it an asset or a liability? It's an asset. That double entry bookkeeping thing. That's a really important concept. It's a Federal Reserve note, so it's a liability of we the people, but when you took it out of your pocket, it was an asset of you, right? Now, it's not terribly interesting yet. We're just establishing what this thing is, that it is a liability of the Federal Reserve, which is the agency of the government. Now, look down on your note, and you'll see a signature on the bottom left and right-hand side. Somebody tell me what the signature is on the bottom left. That's not a rhetorical question. You can answer it.
The U.S. Treasurer.
The U.S. Treasurer. Can anybody tell me who the U.S. Treasurer is right now?
Somebody who signs the bill.
Huh?
Somebody who signs the bill.
That's got to be the coolest job in the world, to be the left-hand signature on the currency, which is the treasurer of the United States of America. Now, what's the signature down on the bottom right-hand side? Secretary of Treasury. That we all know what job that is, and that is a job that actually is filled by someone nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, so therefore they are a bona fide, politically legitimate representative of the United States of America, right? Do we all agree with that? Actually, that would be a pretty cool job, but it has a lot more work to it. The coolest job in America in government is that one on the left-hand side. I don't know what they do. Except for the fact, forever, they don't have to carry business cards anymore. They can just have a pocket full of singles. Hey, yeah, let me sign it for you. Sign it for you. Now we're going to get asked an interesting question. At least to me, anyway. We established that this was a Federal Reserve note, an obligation, a liability of the Federal Reserve. Why isn't it signed by the chairman of the Federal Reserve? When you take out a note on a house, I assume that a few of you have done that, does the banker usually require you sign for yourself? They do. I can't go in and say, I'd like to issue a liability and Bill will sign for it. First, he wouldn't say, I wouldn't do it, and the banker would say, no, you have to sign your own note. Very interesting. The fact that this note is issued by the Federal Reserve but signed by the Secretary of Treasury tells you that the independence of the central bank is actually a political decision. It is actually not in the Constitution whatsoever. Actually, in the Constitution, who has the right to create these things?
House of Representatives.
Bingo! The Congress. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress of the three branches the unique authority to coin money and regulate the value thereof. So monetary policy is not the fourth branch of the government. It's not in the Constitution whatsoever. It was created by Congress in 1913. In fact, in the history of our country, we had a central bank before which was decreated. You remember that one? A certain fellow named Jackson? So the central bank is a political creation. And the political process made the decision to make it operationally independent. But the Fed does not have constitutional status whatsoever. I'm not in Fed bashing today, I'm in teaching mode today. It doesn't have constitutional backing. Now, let's ask another question. We'd established that this is a liability of the Federal Reserve. Double entry bookkeeping, what's on the other side of the balance sheet? Debt of the United States Treasury, correct? So essentially the Fed is this magic little place that takes U.S. Treasury debt and turns it into Federal Reserve notes. That's a really cool job. A really cool job, because this is a liability of the United States of America. The debt that the Treasury issue is a liability of the United States. So essentially the Fed converts one type of debt into another type of debt. And that's cool, because Congress under Article 1, Section 8 also has the right to issue debt on behalf of the United States of America. So nothing illegal going on here. We're just teaching the fundamentals. Now, let's get to the really cool part. Bill wanted to get there early. What does it say on the left-hand side beyond above the circle that has a letter in it. There's a magic phrase. This note is legal tender for what?
All debts.
All debts, public and private. Legal tender. What does that mean? It means if I owe you money, suppose I borrowed 100 of these from you, I owe you money, and I give you 100 of these, I have legally fulfilled my obligation to you, right? That you can no longer sue me for breach of contract. That this satisfies all obligations. You go into a pub and they want, what, I don't drink anymore, but what, $7 for a glass of beer? You put 7 on these, you're all clear, right? You're all clear. Legal tender for all debts, public and private. But conceptually, the Treasury Secretary down here, this is a sidebar, I can't read on mine. Does everybody have the same Treasury Secretary, or do you have lots of different ones? To tell you how old your currency is. Do we have any Mnuchin's in the room? Polson's in the room? Huh? Ah, you got a Geithner over there. Probably I'd say the lion's share of them are Geithners in the room just because of the longevity of these pieces of paper. But theoretically, the Treasury Secretary, who signs the Federal Reserve note, could issue a whole bunch of Treasury debt and then tell the Federal Reserve to issue a whole lot of these Federal Reserve notes to buy the Treasury debt that he just issued. And you could have a fun party, right? It'd be a fun party. To have the right to issue legal tender is really cool. Have you ever had the urge to go down in your cellar and print some up for yourself? Wouldn't that be really cool to be able to do that? Problem is that it's illegal. It's illegal. We the people, through the Constitution, give Congress the right to regulate both debt issuance and currency issues. And at any given time, the Congress can change its mind about the arrangements. There's nothing sacred about the independence of the central bank. Now, given the fact that theoretically, since it's not backed by anything, they could print these up as much as they want, inherently you have the answer to why Congress established the Federal Reserve. And here I'm going to give a hat tip to Congress. People say Congress is an undisciplined, uncoordinated place that doesn't know what the hell it's doing. Has anybody ever said that in this room? No one's raising their hand because you're embarrassed, but I'm sure that you've all said that in one juncture or the other. Actually, it was incredibly intelligent for them to say, let us be in charge of that. That is too powerful. That's like having a printing press in your cellar. No, don't trust us with that, because we'll buy votes with it. We'll buy votes with it. So that's the reason that you have central bank independence. But my essential point, the one that I want to leave you with today, is that the current arrangement has no intrinsic reason to live forever. and that the more we use monetary policy in our economy to try to fix all problems, like we did coming out of the last liquidity trap, the greater is the incentive for Congress to change the rules on central bank independence. That is the key nugget I want to leave you with. Last year I said that I thought that central bank independence would be redefined over the next 3 to 5 years. That was my concluding comment. We're only 1 year in, so now I have 2 to 4. But I think the mosaic of policies is going to become ever more important. And if and when necessary, for instance, if the Fed were to invert the yield curve and not stop tightening, there would be a political response. If the Fed said that 2.5% inflation is a ceiling, and that once we hit 2.5, then we're going to lean on this economy hard, there will be a political response. The half-life of political support for central bank independence is directly related to the time since you had an inflation problem. It has been 30 years since we had an inflation problem. And in fact, academically speaking, I can make the argument that the inflation target should be 3, not 2 anyway. So I think the optimism I heard this morning about no recession on the horizon is very well placed. For the simple reason, the Fed no longer has the ability to be doctrinaire and focused laser beam on its simple mandate. The Fed is appropriately becoming more political. Note I said appropriately. They're paying attention to. And to Janet's credit, she handled Trump coming in, big fiscal deficits late in that economic cycle, which was economically undefensible, by the way. She handled that with great political touch, and Jay Powell as well. And it's actually a very good news story, so I don't have a bad news story. What I wanted to do today is to reiterate that while we love having members of the FOMC here, and I hope that continues forever, they're not as important as they used to be, and that's not degrading them whatsoever. That's actually applauding our overall system, their overall system of democracy, that we're seeing that adjustment. I'm going to leave you with one last thing that's going to anticipate the question, and Jill's going to kill me if I go any longer. I frequently, when I discuss these sort of things, people say, well, this has got to end really, really badly. That if you let governments just print these things, well, it's Zimbabwe. You know, you hear this all the time, that, you know, the currency has no value, that they can just print it up and, you know, let's get gold and small firearms and, you know, canned green peas and get ready for Armageddon. None of that is going to happen, by the way. But I will tell you something for those who say this thing is just paper, it's not worth anything. You're wrong. Because there's another part of Article 1, Section 8 that inherently gives this thing value. Not only does that part of the Constitution give Congress the right to coin money and regulate the value thereof, what else does it do? Does anyone know? To lay and collect taxes. I don't know why the founders used the verb lay and collect as opposed to impose and collect. Congress has the legal power to impose taxes. In fact, that was demonstrated powerfully when the Supreme Court approved Obamacare, that you have the right to impose taxes. And in fact, it is the single most important liability in a lot of our lives, to pay taxes. That's what gives this thing intrinsic value. Unlike any other substitute form of currency, and that this thing is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So if you owe the IRS money, how can you make it good with the IRS? This, or the electronic equivalent thereof, intrinsically gives currency value, because it allows you to extinguish your tax liability, which is a real liability, because if you don't pay your tax liability, what happens? They can send you to jail. So at the end of the day, this little sucker has intrinsic value, because when the IRS agent shows up at your door and wants to put your behind bars, this is your not go to jail ticket that is uniquely valuable and will always have value, rooted in the Constitution, because that section of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, gives Congress the power to both create these and also impose taxes, which means that from the creation, fiscal policy and monetary policy were cut from the same bolt of cloth. And over the next 2 to 4 years now, because the years passed, I anticipate that that combination of clothes is going to be more coordinated and more soothing to the concept of democracy than it's been in a long period of time. So if you work on Wall Street, quit looking at the Fed so much and look at other things. Thank you very much.